A young waitress always saved leftovers for a homeless man, not knowing he would return years later, wearing a suit and with a lawyer. Before we begin the story, leave a comment and tell us which city you're watching from. And if this moment touches you even a little, hit like and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories that remind us kindness matters. Let's begin. The diner wasn't special. It didn't have 5 stars or velvet menus. It smelled like fried onions by noon and like burnt toast by 6. But it was steady, predictable. The kind of place where the booths were cracked and the waitresses poured coffee like they were born holding the pot. Ellie Turner had worked there since she was 17. By 19, she could carry 3 plates on one arm and remember 6 orders without writing anything down. Her uniform was a white blouse, tucked into black slacks with a red apron tied too tight around the waist. It had a rip in the side that she stitched herself with fishing line. She didn't mind the work. It was honest. And most days, it gave her just enough to cover groceries, gas, and the rent she split with her mom, who mostly slept and didn't say much these days. Every shift started the same. Ellie came in early, not because she had to, but because she liked the quiet before the fryers started screaming. She'd wipe down the counter, restock the sugar packets, and stand for a moment just watching the street through the window. That's where she first saw him, sitting across the road back against the parking meter. Always the same coat, too big for his frame. A hat pulled low over his eyes, a backpack beside him, and a dog, brown and aging, curled into his side like they'd been born together and survived every season since. He never asked for anything. Not a word, not a cup, not a sign. He just sat. At first, Ellie didn't think much of it. Cities had people like that. Men folded by time, forgotten. She watched from behind the glass, wondering if he slept there or if he wandered after the morning crowd. One night, after a particularly slow Tuesday, Ellie boxed up the leftover fries and half a grilled cheese. That had gone untouched. She wrapped them in foil, stuffed a napkin inside, and hesitated at the door. She didn't know why she did it, maybe guilt, maybe instinct, but she crossed the street and knelt beside him. He didn't look at her. Didn't speak. She just placed the bag near his feet and whispered, "Still warm," then walked back inside. The next night she did it again. This time a slight nod. The third night, nothing. But the bag was gone by morning, so she kept doing it. She started adding extra bacon when no one was watching, slipping in pie when it was left on the counter, writing tiny notes on the back of receipts, things like, "Hang in there," or "Hope this helps." One time she wrote, "I see you," but she never knew if he read them. It became a habit, a quiet rhythm in her life, the kind no one else noticed but one she never skipped. Weeks turned into months. Sometimes he wasn't there, and she still packed the bag just in case. She never told anyone, not her boss, not her co-workers, not even her mother. It wasn't charity, it was something else, it was hers. Then came last Tuesday. The diner was half empty, the weather outside undecided between rain and just being miserable. Ellie was behind the counter pouring coffee into the same chipped mug she always did when she heard the bell above the door. A black car was parked outside. That alone was strange. People in cars like that didn't come into diners like this. The man who stepped in wore a dark suit, tailored, sharp. His shoes were polished, his coat buttoned tight, and he carried a leather briefcase. The kind of man who probably owned a watch more expensive than Ellie's car. He scanned the room, eyes flicking from booth to booth before landing on her. He walked straight to the counter. "Are you Ellie Turner?" he asked. She blinked. "Yeah?" He reached into his coat and handed her a business card. "Peter Lang, attorney at law." "I represent a client," he said. "Someone who prefers to remain anonymous for now." She looked at the card, then at the man, then back at the card again. Her heart ticked faster. "Did something happen?" Peter smiled politely. "No, but something is about to." Before he could say more, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Ellie unfolded it slowly. It was a receipt from the diner. 3 years old, her own handwriting on the back. "Hope this helps. No one should go hungry." Ellie, her mouth went dry. She remembered that shift, that grilled cheese. Peter continued. "My client kept this. He said it was the First kind thing anyone had done for him in years. Ellie felt her chest tighten. He came into a bit of money, Peter said, and the first thing he wanted to do was find the girl who gave him dinner. She didn't speak. Peter gave her a moment, then added, "He'd like to meet you. Before we go on, if this moment made you feel something, even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the like button and help us keep telling stories that remind us all that kindness matters. It might not cost much, but it could change someone's life." Ellie stared at the note again. It was smudged, faded at the edges, but it had survived. Through weather, through movement, through everything. She didn't even remember writing that exact one. She didn't even remember his face, but he remembered hers. And now, somewhere in this city, he was waiting. In a suit, with a lawyer and a story to tell. Ellie didn't move for a long time after Peter Lang left the diner. The sun had shifted slightly in the window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Her hand was still gripping the edge of the receipt he had handed her, the one with her own handwriting. On the back, "Hope this helps. No one should go hungry. Ellie." She read the message again as if seeing it for the first time. The paper was old, slightly torn at the edge, with a brownish stain in the corner. Probably coffee. She remembered the shift vaguely. That day had been slow and the cook had almost thrown the leftover sandwich away, but she had boxed it, scribbled a note quickly, and passed it quietly to the man who sat outside every night, and he had kept it for years. It felt surreal, like stepping into a memory that had refused to fade for someone else. Customers kept talking. Dishes clattered. A busboy knocked over a salt shaker. But Ellie barely heard any of it. She folded the note gently and slipped it into her pocket, hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Peter Lang's card was crisp, formal, out of place, in her apron. She stared at the number, read it 3 times, didn't call, not yet. Instead, she worked the rest of her shift in silence, responding to customers with soft nods, pouring coffee like her body was moving without her mind. Her thoughts stayed wrapped around a single idea. He remembered. She walked home that night with her hood up and her headphones in, but no music playing, just the dull hum of her footsteps and the wind and the question looping in her mind. Why now? The next morning, Ellie stood outside a small office building on the east side of town. The sign on the door read, "Lang and Moore, Attorneys at Law," a place she'd passed a dozen times but never entered. Peter greeted her with a calm smile and offered her a seat in the waiting room. There were magazines on the table. She didn't touch them. Her fingers tapped against her knees as she waited, tension building in her stomach. "He's just next door," Peter said after a few minutes. "When you're ready." She nodded. She wasn't ready, but she stood anyway. Peter knocked once, opened the door and stepped aside. Ellie entered slowly. The room was simple. A desk, 2 chairs, and a wide window that let in the grey light of the late morning. A soft rustle on the floor caught her attention first. A dog, older but well-groomed, wagging its tail lazily as it lay on a folded blanket. Then the man stood. He looked different, but not unfamiliar. His beard was trimmed, his skin clean. He wore a navy blue suit, pressed and perfect. His shoes shined. And yet, behind the neatness, the frame was the same. Tall but thin, shoulders slightly, hunched eyes dark and weathered. He smiled. "Ellie," he said. She took a cautious step forward. "You're—" He nodded. "James." She stopped. Her breath caught. The man who had sat across the street for over a year, who barely nodded when she gave him food, who never said her name, he was standing here, clean, composed, and calling her by name. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I could," she answered. He chuckled lightly, then stepped forward and pulled out a chair for her. She sat down slowly. "I don't even know where to begin," she said. "Neither do I," he replied, "but here we are." They talked, slowly at first. James told her about his life, how he'd once taught high school English, how a work injury had left him unable to stand for long periods, how medical bills had piled up, how his home had slipped away piece by piece. "I thought I could get back on my feet," he said. "I kept telling myself it was temporary, But temporary became winter and then spring and then a year. He paused. People looked through me like I was a stain. But you didn't. I just gave you food, Ellie said. You gave me acknowledgement. James replied. You gave me dignity. You never asked questions. You never looked scared. You never looked sorry. She swallowed hard. I didn't think it mattered, she said. It mattered every night, he answered. Then he reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a check. Ellie's eyes widened. No, she said immediately. I didn't do it for anything. I know, James said. That's why this matters. You gave without expectation. I can't repay that, but I can reflect it. She looked down at the number. It wasn't small. You got all this from a settlement? She asked. He nodded. An old insurance claim, a malpractice case from my surgery. It finally cleared. He paused. I told my lawyer the first thing I wanted to do was find the waitress who saved my life with leftovers. She laughed softly, covering her mouth. He smiled again. But that's not all. James slid another envelope across the table. Inside was a letterhead, the Turner Fund. Beneath it, a mission statement, simple and powerful, dedicated to restoring dignity to those who've fallen through the cracks. One meal, one moment, one human act at a time. Ellie stared at it, heart pounding. You named it after me? I had to, James said, because you were the first person who made me feel like I was still a person. Tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't speak, so she nodded, and James nodded back. They sat in silence again, but this time it was full. Heavy with memory. With restoration. Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out the old receipt, the note she'd written years ago. James smiled. I've kept it every day. I think I'll keep it too, she whispered. And somewhere outside the window, the city moved on, cars honking, lives rushing past. But in that office, for just a moment, two people who had once lived in completely different worlds sat across from each other, bound by a bag of leftovers and a sentence scribbled in blue ink, and everything had changed. Ellie didn't leave the office right away. She sat in the hallway outside Peter Lang's door with the envelope from the Turner Fund on her lap. Her fingers pressed gently into the paper, like she could somehow absorb what had just happened through touch alone. The sounds of downtown were muffled behind thick glass. Horns, the occasional siren, the rhythmic click of someone walking by, in heels. The ordinary world moving on like nothing had changed, but inside her everything had. She stared at the envelope again. Her name, Turner, printed across the top in clean serif letters, under a logo that looked simple but official. She hadn't designed it, hadn't asked for it, and yet here it was. A foundation. In her name. Created by a man she once gave a grilled cheese sandwich to without a second thought. Just yesterday, she'd spent her morning wiping syrup off booth, tables and folding napkins, while her boss complained about labor costs. Today someone was thanking her for saving his life, because of a note, a meal, a moment. She exhaled slowly. Inside the office, James stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the world outside like it was something both familiar and brand new. When Ellie finally stood, he turned. I hope it wasn't too much, he said quietly. It was, she answered, in the best way. They walked a few blocks together after the meeting. The streets were buzzing with lunch-hour crowds, people staring down at their phones or briskly crossing intersections without looking up. James kept his hands in his pockets. Ellie held the envelope to her chest like it was something sacred. How did you find me? She asked. The note, he replied. I kept it. Peter had some contacts. The diner's name was on the receipt. The rest was just persistence. Ellie smiled. You really didn't have to do all this. I did, he said. Not just for you, for me too. I needed to prove to myself more than anyone that I was worth saving. You were, she said, even when you didn't know it. They stopped at a corner. A man on the sidewalk held a sign, just need something to eat. Ellie reached into her coat, pulled out a folded $5 bill and walked over. She didn't say anything, just smiled and offered it. The man looked her in the eye. Thanks, he said. She nodded and walked back. James was watching her. That's why I picked your name, he said. That night, Ellie walked home a different way. She passed the corner where she used to see James, his coat bundled up around his knees, the dog curled into his ribs like a second heartbeat. That space was empty now. The sidewalk bare, she paused, bent down, touched the cold metal of the parking meter with her fingertips. Then she stood and kept walking. 2 days later, Peter called again. "There's something James would like you to see," he said. "If you're up for it." She was. She arrived at a low brick building on the east side. New paint, wide windows, a small garden in front even though it was late fall. A sign hung above the door. Turner House. Inside, it was bright, clean. The walls painted. Soft beige and sage green. Rows of bunk beds lined the main room, each with clean linens and a folded towel at the foot. There was a common room with beanbag chairs and a shelf full of books. A kitchen that smelled like something warm and comforting was simmering. A woman met her at the door. "You must be Ellie," she said. "We've heard so much about you." Ellie followed her through the rooms. Past a classroom space, a job resource board, a cork wall filled with drawings, photos, and handwritten thank you notes. Then they came to a wall. A simple frame hung there. Inside, the note. The one she had written years ago in blue pen on the back of a receipt. It was faded now, smudged and softened by time, but the words were still there. "Hope this helps. No one should go hungry. Ellie." Beneath it, a small plaque. "In honor of the one who saw us." Ellie didn't say anything. She couldn't. Her throat tightened and her eyes burned with sudden tears, but she didn't look away. James appeared beside her, smiling. "They all read it," he said, "sometimes more than once." They sat together. In the kitchen afterward, sipping tea from mismatched mugs. Across the room, a teenager helped a man fill out a housing application. A young woman folded donated clothes and hummed softly. A little girl colored a butterfly on the edge of a flyer. "This is what you built," Ellie said. "No," James replied. "This is what your kindness built." Ellie looked around. "Do they know?" "Some." "Enough." "But the name is on everything. Now, people ask and we tell them. About the waitress, about the sandwich, about the night someone saw me when I felt invisible." Ellie's voice was soft. "You were never invisible." He looked at her. "You were the only one who acted like..." That was true. They walked to the front door together when she was ready to leave. Before she stepped out, James stopped her. "I know this isn't what you planned," he said, "but would you maybe consider joining us? Helping here? Not just as a name." She blinked. "You mean work here? Maybe even lead here?" Ellie looked around again, at the community bulletin board. The hand-painted banner above the kitchen, the laughter from down the hall. "I've been serving tables for 4 years," she said. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this." James smiled. "Neither did I, but here we are." That night, Ellie sat in her room with the old note propped on her nightstand. Not the framed one, a photocopy James had given her. Folded neatly like it came straight from the register drawer, she ran her fingers over the words. "Hope this helps." She had meant it then. She meant it still. Because some help echoes, and some stories don't end at the table where they began. Ellie didn't answer James's invitation right away. When he asked her to join the shelter, not as a guest, not as a name on the wall, but as someone who would help guide it, her mind went blank for a moment. Then it flooded, with doubt, with disbelief. With every moment she'd ever been told she wasn't enough. She walked home with that same heaviness pressing into her chest. It was the kind of feeling that made her question everything. Could she really do it? What did she know about running? Anything besides the dessert station or closing out a till at the end of a long shift? She didn't have a degree. She didn't have connections. All she had were worn shoes, a handful of kindness, and a name someone else had placed on a foundation. But that night, she pulled the old receipt from her coat pocket again, the note she had once written in haste, with blue pen and grease on her fingers. "Hope this helps. No one should go hungry. Ellie." She ran her thumb over the crease in the paper. That message had survived years in someone's pocket. It had crossed time, weather, and heartbreak. It had outlived the sandwich it came with, and someone had remembered. So maybe, just maybe, she could be part of building something that would last even longer. 3 days later, she called Peter. Tell him yes, she said. She expected to start small, maybe help with paperwork or sweep the entryway or fold linens. But when she arrived at the shelter, James was already waiting with a binder and a desk with a post-it that read LET Tans Community Liaison. She stared at it. I don't know what a liaison does, she confessed. James smiled. For you connect. That's what you've always done. The first few weeks were rough. She got names wrong, twice double-booked the laundry room, accidentally gave a diabetic man regular soda. She cried once in the storage closet, ate lunch in silence some days, too overwhelmed to speak. But then came small moments. A woman named Monica, who hadn't spoken in days, asked Ellie where she got her scarf. A boy named Theo left a drawing on her desk. 3 stick figures under a sun, one of them labeled Ellie. A man named Brian, who she had once handed a sandwich to outside the diner, recognized her and called her the girl who sees. One afternoon, a woman arrived with 3 children. She had 2 bags, no stroller. Her jacket barely zipped. Ellie helped carry the bags to a temporary room and handed the kids warm juice boxes from the kitchen. She found a stuffed bunny someone had donated last week and gave it to the youngest. Later that night, as the shelter grew quiet, Ellie found a crumpled note on her desk. You looked at me like I still existed. Thank you. She read it 3 times before folding it neatly and tucking it next to the original receipt in her wallet. By the end of the month, Ellie had helped coordinate 2 job interviews, 3 new medical appointments, and a coat drive that filled an entire hallway with racks of winter wear. She started waking up before her alarm. She stopped checking the clock halfway through the day. And every once in a while, she'd look around the shelter and feel something she hadn't felt in a long time needed. But not everything was easy. One evening, a man came in yelling. He was cold, angry, strung out. He threw a chair, demanded a bed that didn't exist. Staff rushed in. Ellie stepped forward, heart pounding. She didn't speak. She just stood steady and calm, arms open but not reaching. The man froze, looked at her and left. Later, one of the staff members pulled her aside. What you did? I don't know how you didn't flinch. Ellie smiled weakly. I've served coffee to worse. One rainy night, the power went out. The entire block went dark. Panic rippled through the rooms. Ellie lit emergency candles, sat in the hallway with a group of kids, and told stories about the diner and the customers who used to tip in loose change and life advice. They laughed, loudly. James walked by with a flashlight and paused to listen. Later, when the lights returned, a boy tugged Ellie's sleeve and said, "That was the best blackout ever." They started putting her name on things, a bulletin board called Ellie's Corner, where people could post notes of gratitude, job leads, or drawings. A daily sandwich special named after her, grilled cheese with apple slices, a mural in the TD hallway slowly growing each week, painted handprints from residents, each one labeled with a name and one word, hope. But the moment that stayed with her most came quietly. It was late. She was sitting on the back steps, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the alley that used to feel like the end of the world. A young man sat down beside her, didn't say anything at first. Then he handed her a coin. "I kept this," he said. "It was in the bottom of a paper bag you gave me once." With the sandwich, she turned it over in her hand. A simple quarter. "It's just change," she said. "No," he replied. "It reminded me that someone thought I mattered enough to give me more than nothing." Ellie looked at the coin and held it tighter than she meant to. That night she wrote a new note. She taped it to the back of her door. "You don't need to fix the world. Just don't walk past it." It wasn't fancy, but it was true. By the start of December, the shelter was fuller than ever. Temperatures plunged overnight. Ice crawled along gutters. The morning air bit at fingers and cheeks like it had teeth. Each night more people arrived. Some had blankets wrapped tight over jackets. Others had nothing but layers of shirts and fingers tucked into their sleeves. All of them came with the same question in their eyes. "Do you have space?" Most nights the answer should have been no, but they made room anyway. James moved his office into a janitor's closet to clear floor space. Volunteers turned supply areas into sleeping quarters. Ellie and the team bought fold-out cots with borrowed money and donated every square inch they could. Nobody was turned away, not if Ellie could help it. One night, a woman stumbled in carrying a baby and a half-frozen duffel bag. Her name was Carla. She barely spoke. Her fingers were red and cracked, her eyes hollow with fatigue. Ellie wrapped her hands in warm cloths, gave her soup in a real ceramic bowl, found a quiet corner and laid out a blanket. Sat nearby without speaking, just present, just human. The next morning, Carla woke before anyone else. She cleaned the bathrooms without being asked, folded towels, smiled at a boy who hadn't spoken in 3 days. Sometimes people just need one soft landing, James said, watching her from the hallway. Ellie nodded. I think I needed one too. Then the city inspector came, clipboard in hand, polite but sharp-eyed. He noted the capacity, the fire exits, the temporary wiring. You've exceeded your limit, he said. And you're running without upgraded systems. Ellie kept her voice steady. These people don't have another option. We've made it work. I don't doubt your intentions, he replied, but the code doesn't bend for good hearts. 2 days later, they received the official notice. 30 days. Either reduce occupancy and upgrade infrastructure or face immediate shutdown. James paced the hallway in silence. Ellie stared at the paper until the ink blurred. I won't ask people to go back into the cold, she said. James looked at her weary. Then we find another way. She didn't sleep that night, sat on the floor of her small apartment, papers spread out like a storm. She reread old budgets, scanned every community grant database she could find, scribbled notes and crossed them out, rewrote them again. By dawn, she had made a decision. She walked into the shelter and called everyone. To the dining room, staff, volunteers, some residents who wanted to help. We're going to fight this, she said. Not because it's easy, but because nobody here deserves to sleep on a sidewalk while we figure it out. Heads nodded. Someone clapped. James simply smiled and said, Tell us what to do. They started small, flyers printed at a local church, social media posts made by a teenager named Ava, who used to run a fashion blog, videos with shaky audio but powerful words. The Turner House isn't just shelter. It's home. It's family. People listened. A bakery hosted a donation box. A retired electrician offered to help with rewiring. A church donated cots. A former resident wrote an op-ed for the local paper titled, The Place That Saved Me. But it still wasn't enough. The repairs cost more than they'd imagined. The occupancy changes required city permits. The plumbing had to be overhauled. They were running out of time. Then Ellie had an idea. She reached out to everyone the shelter had ever helped. Mothers, veterans, students, seniors, people with apartments now, with jobs, with stability. Tell your story, she said. If this place changed your life, say so. And they did. Videos poured in, photos, voice messages. I got sober at the Turner House. They gave me my first bed in 3 years. They looked at me like I was still a person. Ellie compiled them all, cut together a 3-minute video, posted it. The fundraiser exploded. A local news channel picked up the story, called Ellie the Heart of the City. The mayor tweeted, a former professional athlete who grew up in the neighborhood matched every donation up to $25,000. Ellie spoke at a community rally held in a park, standing on a milk crate with a microphone that kept cutting out. I used to serve coffee, she said, and every night I wrapped up leftovers for someone I didn't even know. I didn't do it because I had a plan. I did it because I couldn't walk past someone who was hungry. The crowd applauded, she continued. And I'm not walking past this place now. If you're here, if you're listening, you don't have to be rich. You just have to care. By the time she stepped down, donations had doubled. 30 days later, the inspector returned. He walked the halls, measuring tape in hand, checked fire exits, wiring, bunk spacing. He said little. At the end, he signed the form. You passed, he said. Barely, but you did, he looked up. Whatever you're doing here, don't stop. That night they threw a dinner. Not for donors, not for the press, for the residents. The people who had made it worth fighting for. Tables were filled with lentil stew and fresh bread and apple crumble. A local band played acoustic songs in the corner. Kids danced. Carla held her baby while laughing with 2 new moms she'd met. Brian told corny jokes while wearing a paper crown someone had made out of napkins. Ellie watched it all from the doorway. James stepped beside her. You did, he said. She shook her head. We did. And for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to believe it. January crept in slowly, not with the chaos of holidays or the clamor of fundraising deadlines, but with something heavier, a silence that felt too still, a calm that pressed against the windows like cold fog, slipping between the walls of the shelter and curling up in corners where warmth used to live. The Turner house had made it through December. The building stood. The people stayed. The shelves were stocked better than they'd ever been. And yet something inside Ellie felt off. For the first time in months, there was no crisis, no fire to put out, no inspector at the door. And that sudden absence of urgency left her with too much room to think. She kept busy, organized supply closets that didn't need organizing, rewrote orientation packets, added 3 new motivational quotes to the staff bulletin board. But she couldn't quiet the voice in her head. What now? One evening, Ellie lingered in the office long after the lights had dimmed. The framed receipt still hung behind the desk, a daily reminder of where it all began. Hope this helps. 3 words, a pen, a greasy napkin. That was the seed of all this. But now looking at it, Ellie didn't feel inspired. She felt pressure. That note had traveled through time and trauma. It had become a symbol, a myth, something people pointed to and said, "See? That's who she is." But Ellie didn't always feel like that girl. Sometimes she was tired, sometimes she was unsure. Sometimes she just wanted to sleep for 12 hours without thinking about grant cycles or plumbing repairs, or the weight of strangers depending on her smile to feel okay. She turned off her phone, closed the office door, and let herself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way tired people cry when no one's watching and they're not sure how to stop. James knocked once, then stepped in without waiting for an answer. He didn't say anything at first, just stood near the door, then slowly walked in and sat beside her. "You don't have to keep going at this pace," he said. "The world doesn't stop spinning if you rest." Ellie laughed, wiped her cheek. "I feel like it might. That if I sit still too long, everything we've built will collapse." James shook his head. "What we've built is stronger than you think." He leaned forward. "You know what I remember most about that sandwich you gave me?" he asked. She shook her head. "It was hot. You wrapped it in foil. And even though I hadn't eaten all day, I remember holding it and just feeling the warmth for a second before unwrapping it. Like the heat itself reminded me I was alive." He paused. "You gave me more than food. You gave me presence. And now then it's your turn to receive some." Ellie took 2 days off, not to travel, not to get away, just to breathe. She stayed at her mum's apartment, watched old cooking shows, took walks. Didn't check her email once. She slept late. Read a book she never finished back in high school, made pancakes with too much syrup and no guilt. And when she returned, something had changed. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. The first day. Back, she noticed how quiet the shelter could be before breakfast, the soft murmur of people waking up, the clink of mugs, the rustle of blankets being folded. She helped Theo paint a giant sun over the hallway mural. Helped Ava hang glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling tiles. She sat with Carla and her baby for almost an hour, just listening to lullabies. When Marlene forgot the story she was telling halfway through, Ellie waited. Marlene laughed. "What was I saying?" Ellie smiled. "It was something good. Keep going." Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Just the Turner Foundation, handwritten in careful print. Inside was a check. It was big. Not cover the electric bill big. Not even fix the roof big. It was transformational. The note inside said, "I used to sleep under the old train. Bridge. You gave me a warm place and a reason to wake up. This is my thank you. Don't stop. Signed only. J.S. They never figured out who it was." James thought he recognized the initials. Ellie wasn't sure. But it didn't matter, because it meant something. Not just the money, but the message. People remembered. People came back. They called a staff meeting. But instead of standing at the front with a plan, Ellie stood in the center of the circle. "What do we need?" she asked. "What would make this place not just survive, but grow?" A hand went up. A quiet room for moms to breastfeed, another, a GED prep program, better lighting in the back hallway, a van to take folks to interviews. Books for kids. Ellie wrote everything down, not just the big ideas, even the smallest ones. She took the list home that night and taped it above her bed, not as a goal, but as a reminder. Late that night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Outside, the city hummed, dogs barked. A siren passed somewhere in the distance. She closed her eyes and thought about that first moment, standing outside the diner, sandwich in hand, unsure of whether she should cross the street. It had seemed like such a small thing, but it had been everything. She hadn't fixed the world, but she hadn't walked past it either, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. By mid-February, the Turner house felt like more than just a shelter. It felt like a living, breathing thing. It had rhythm, routine, morning coffee brewed by 7 a.m. sharp. Theo's mural stretched further down the hallway with every passing week, now full of vivid oranges and blues that softened the walls. Carla had started a weekly book circle, reading chapters aloud from dog-eared novels. James was teaching budgeting to anyone who showed up on Tuesdays, using his own experience of losing everything as a warning and a lesson. And Ellie had finally started laughing again. The deep kind, the kind that caught her off guard and left her with a hand over her chest and her head tilted back. But with rhythm came attention. And attention brought pressure. It started with a phone call from a local non-profit. "We've seen what you're doing," the woman on the line said. "Have you considered expanding to the north side? There's a real gap in services there." 2 days later, an email from a foundation officer. "We'd love to discuss multi-site growth strategy," and then the board meeting. "Ellie," Peter said gently, "we're sitting on momentum. We can ride this. Do you have a vision for what the next Turner house could be?" She nodded, she smiled, she said, "Absolutely," but later, in the quiet of her apartment, she scribbled in her notebook, "I don't know what I'm doing. Is this still about people or numbers? Am I just trying?" Not to let anyone down, the shelter was still full, and every night. Beds stretched into the dining area again. New faces arrived with old scars. A man named Jericho with a limp from frostbite. A pregnant teen named Ash who never looked up. 3 siblings under 10, found sleeping behind a pharmacy dumpster. The staff was tired, the budget strained. Ellie worked 12-hour days again. When James noticed her skipping meals, he left protein bars on her desk. When he saw the shadows under her eyes, he suggested she take a weekend off. She said, "I'll rest after March." He didn't push. Then Devon collapsed in the hallway. A teenager. 17, tall, quiet. He'd been helping with dishes and tutoring another resident in math. No one knew he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He didn't want to be a problem, didn't want to be another weight on Ellie's shoulders. The ambulance came, took him. He was stable, but something inside Ellie wasn't. That night, she sat on the back steps of the shelter until her hands were too cold to hold the tea mug James had left for her. She stared at the concrete, at the mural on the hallway wall that now read in spray-painted letters, "Still here, but she didn't feel like she was." Theo knocked on her door the next morning. He was 11, smart, always drawing. He held a shoebox wrapped in newspaper. "I made this for you," he said. Ellie opened it. Inside was a miniature version of the shelter, painted walls, tiny beds, a kitchen table with chairs, and in one corner, a desk with a little sign, "You Matter." Ellie stared at it. Her throat tightened. "Wanted you to see what you built," Theo said, "so you don't forget." Then he added, "Even if you feel small sometimes." She cried after he left, not quietly, not out of exhaustion, but because something in her remembered. That night she pulled out every blueprint, grant form and expansion proposal, and she wrote in bold at the top of each, "Why? Why grow? Why now? What?" If the answer wasn't bigger, what if it was deeper? The next morning she met with James, Peter and 2 board members. "I know everyone's excited about expanding," Ellie said, "but we need to ask the harder question first. Are we strong enough to multiply?" Peter raised an eyebrow. "You're saying slow down?" "I'm saying stabilize," she answered. "We've grown fast, beautifully, but Devon nearly passed out in our hallway. We have gaps that will only widen if we don't reinforce what we have." She laid out her vision. Build out trauma-informed training for staff, launch mentorship programs between long-term and new residents, strengthen partnerships with medical and housing resources, provide on-site mental health support, create a stabilization fund for emergencies. Before we go wide, she said, we need to go deep. James smiled. Peter leaned back in his chair. I was going to pitch 3 more Turner houses, but I think this is better. 2 weeks later, they launched Project Roots, the internal growth initiative. Theo designed the logo, a tree with wide roots stretching under a modest house. They replaced one of the offices with a private therapy room. A local therapist volunteered twice a week. Ellie started attending weekly resident roundtables. No agendas, just listening. Someone hung a new sign near the mural. It said, "Depth makes us stronger." They didn't stop helping people, but they stopped rushing. And in the stillness, in the steadiness, something beautiful returned. Clarity, purpose. The reminder that Ellie hadn't started with a plan to grow a brand. She started with a sandwich, and the refusal to walk past someone she could help. That was still enough, and it still was. By the end of March, Turner House felt less like a shelter and more like a home that people were slowly learning to believe in. Not because the problems were gone. The water pressure still dipped when more than 3 showers ran at once. The heater had a stubborn hum. The intake list remained long, and the city funding didn't grow nearly as fast as the need, but inside those walls, something was growing. People were beginning to belong. Ellie saw it every morning when Ava greeted each resident by name while organizing the breakfast line. She saw it in the new kindness between people who didn't speak the same language, in the gentle way Marlene taught a newcomer how to fold towels, the Turner House way. She saw it when Theo, now taller and more confident, led a mural painting session with 2 boys who had only arrived last week. Ellie kept her ritual, sitting early in the morning by the front window, notebook in hand. What do they need today? Some days the answer was food, gloves, bus tokens. Other days it was smaller, someone to say good job. A quiet moment to cry, permission to hope. That's when she saw him. A man, just outside the fence, watching. Same time. Every day. Same spot. He never came closer than the sidewalk. He wore an old coat, clean but faded. His boots were patched at the toes. A duffel bag rested beside him like a permanent fixture. Theo noticed too. He never looked scared, he said. Just like he's waiting. Ellie nodded. On the 3rd day, she walked out with a cup of soup and a grilled cheese. He didn't take it. On the 4th day, he did. No words, just a nod. She brought food again the next day, and the next. On the 5th day, he spoke. You the one. Who started this? Ellie paused. I'm part of it. He nodded slowly. I heard it's different in there. It is, she said. He watched her. Different how? We don't forget your name the second you turn your back, he chuckled. Just once. I'll think about coming in tomorrow. His name was Raymond, a former welder from Pittsburgh, injured, let go. Landlord raised the rent. He lost everything slowly, the way most people do, 1 bill at a time, 1 missed payment, 1 friend who stopped returning calls. Raymond was quiet. Not shy, just careful with his words, like each one had weight. He didn't sign up for a bed, didn't ask for handouts, but he started appearing early to help stack chairs, repaired a broken drawer without being asked, chopped vegetables in the kitchen with the precision of a man who once built things that held people up. Every morning, Ellie began finding folded napkins on her desk, written in pencil, always. Leak in the east hallway. Kid in room 4 having nightmares. Tell Ava her playlist yesterday made the room smile. No signature, just silent service. People noticed. Carla trusted him to hold her daughter while she cleaned. Marlene began calling him Ray, like they'd known each other years. Theo followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions. How do you fix a hinge? What's a flange? Why do you always carry a pencil? Raymond never answered quickly, but when he did, it always stuck. One night, Ellie sat beside him on the back steps. Raymond handed her a mug of tea. You ever think about quitting? He asked. She nodded. All the time. You? Yeah, but it never works. Why not? Raymond looked out over the street. Because people still need what I have, even when I forget it myself. Ellie blinked. He stood, stretched, then added, You remind me. Then one morning Raymond was gone. No one saw him leave. His bunk made, his bag missing. Only thing left was a folded napkin on the door of the pantry. You gave me back my voice. It's time I used it. Beneath the words, a pencil sketch. 2 boots walking east. A sun rising over the corner of the page. Ellie didn't cry right away, but that night she sat at her desk with the napkin in her hand for over an hour. She placed it next to the first note she had ever written, the one that started it all, and then she wrote one more. Raymond, Turner House is always your house. That same week, Carla moved into her first apartment. She left behind a crib, freshly cleaned and labeled, For the next mama. Theo passed his school placement exam and brought Ellie a lanyard with his new school's logo. I'm going to be the kid who draws on everything, he said proudly. Even Marlene, who had sworn she'd never leave, got on a bus to Oregon after her sister found a place for them both. Ellie didn't ask anyone to stay, because she understood now. The ones who leave are proof it's working. James built a new display in the dining hall, a map of names. Each person who left pinned their name, their new destination, and one word. Nina, Florida, healing. Devon, apartment 202, safe. Riley, GED, complete, starting. And Ellie, she added her own. Ellie, still here, listening. Above the map, Theo painted bold letters. We don't disappear, we grow. And every time Ellie looked at that wall, she remembered what Raymond said. People still need what you have, even when you forget it yourself. April arrived not with celebration, but with a sigh, a slow exhale after months of tension and frost. The air softened. The sun stayed longer. The street in front of Turner House, once grey and slick with ice, now held warmth in its cracks. Dandelions sprouted defiantly along the fence. Inside, everything still moved, but it moved differently. The chaos had settled. Meals ran on time. The plumbing held steady. The volunteer calendar was full. Donations flowed in regularly since the interviews had started reaching people online. For the first time in a long while, Ellie didn't feel like she was sprinting. She was walking, watching, listening, and feeling something unfamiliar. Not stress, not fear, but weight. A quiet, heavy question. What now? The wall of becoming had grown so much it curved around the dining room corner. More than 80 names, each one still tied by yarn to the center. Turner House. Some were written on bright cardstock, others on napkins or scraps of paper or photos, printed at the library. Carla, RN license, a steady. Devon, GED passed, strong. Theo, scholarship, growing. Raymond, unknown, found. Some names had updates mailed in from other states. Others had been added by friends with notes like, he left smiling. Ellie stood before it every morning. Sometimes she touched the threads like strings on an instrument. She didn't need them to remember, but she touched them anyway. That week, Ava found an old envelope buried behind a stack of file folders in the office. It held over 40 folded napkins. Each one carried a handwritten message, most unsigned. That hug kept me from leaving that night. You said my name and I remembered I had one. Still scared, but warm, Ellie sat down on the floor and cried as she read them. Not from grief, but from awe. Each napkin was a small echo, a voice from a day she barely remembered speaking. Into the present. She taped the first one on the wall outside her office. By noon, James had added 3 more. By morning, a new wall was born. The wall of thanks. No rules, no required format, just truth. Folded, written, drawn, or scribbled. By the end of the week, it covered the hallway. Even delivery drivers stopped to read it. Some left their own notes. Meanwhile, Theo had been building something else. With Carla's help, he created a makeshift recording schedule. He repurposed an old tablet into a camera. Ava brought in a lamp with a shade made of paper clips and wire. The laundry room became a studio. 2 chairs, a white backdrop, a cardboard sign taped to the door. Turner speaks. The first episode featured Marlene. She spoke slowly, deliberately, about grief, about surviving it. I came here to disappear, she said. But you all kept saying my name. You made me stay. Then Dante, who talked about being invisible until someone looked at him and asked, "You okay?" with no agenda. Then Ava, who spoke of her son, of how she wanted him to see her try. Ellie didn't appear on camera, but she watched every video and... One night Theo knocked on her door. "You have to tell it," he said. "Your story. People don't know how this all began." Ellie hesitated. "It wasn't anything big," she replied. "Just a sandwich." Theo smiled. "That's exactly why it matters." The next day, Ellie sat in the chair, nervous, barely breathing. But once the red light blinked, she looked at the camera and began. She told them about that day in the cold, about the man on the bench, about the sandwich, about the silence, and how everything she built after that came from a single decision: to stop looking away. The video spread faster than the others. It was shared by shelters, churches, schools. People wrote in, "I watched this with my teenage son. He cried. I volunteer now because of this video. This changed my heart." Donations increased. Applications to volunteer tripled. And Ellie, overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, knew it was working. One evening, while locking up, she noticed a new note on the wall of thanks, written in looping cursive on a sticky note. "You didn't save me. You reminded me I wasn't disposable." Underneath it, someone had drawn a small heart. Ellie pressed her fingers to it gently and whispered, "Thank you." The final week of May arrived quietly, as all big changes do. There was no announcement, no sudden shift, just the feeling that something was nearing completion. The trees along the street outside Turner House had bloomed fully. The mural Theo and Ava had been working on was finally finished, a giant tree whose roots cradled names, each one belonging to someone who had once passed through the shelter's doors. Inside, the hum of life continued. Meals were served. Beds were made. Laughter came from the common room where James taught a card trick to a new resident, but something was different. Ellie could feel it in her chest, a weight, but not a heavy one, more like the warmth of carrying something meaningful. Something finished, something ready to pass on. It had been a year, 1 year since she'd handed a sandwich to a man in the cold, 1 year since Turner House became more than just a place to sleep, and now it was time to decide what that meant, not just for her, but for what came next. She stood alone in the office one morning, watching sunlight spill across the floor. She reached into her drawer and pulled out the first napkin, the one she always kept folded at the bottom. The ink was fading now, but the words were still visible. "Hope this helps." It had helped, more than she ever could have imagined. That day, she called a staff meeting. No agenda. No clipboards. Just a table full of people who had held the place together. James, Ava, Carla, Theo, even Marlene, who happened to be visiting that week. Ellie spoke slowly. "I think it's time we talk about what this place is becoming." They listened. "It started with survival," she said. "Then it became sanctuary, but now I think it's something more." Theo nodded. "It's a story," Carla added. "A movement." James leaned back and smiled. "A lighthouse." They spent the afternoon dreaming out loud. A second Turner House, maybe in another city, a toolkit for starting one from scratch. Guides, interviews, training, a mobile unit to serve areas with no shelter access, a podcast, a book. Ellie wrote each idea down, not to lock them in stone, but to keep them safe. Seeds for whatever future came next. Later that evening, she returned to the common room. Theo sat near the window, sketching in his notebook. Carla was helping a new resident register for ID documents. Dante laughed loudly from the kitchen, where he was experimenting with a new recipe involving 3 types of beans and entirely too much garlic, and Ellie felt it, what had always eluded her in the beginning. Not control, not perfection, but peace. The next morning the doorbell rang early. Ellie opened it to find a man she didn't recognize, older, weathered. His clothes were neat but clearly worn. He held a paper bag and a small envelope. "Are you Ellie?" he asked. She nodded. "I was told to give you this." He handed her the items, nodded once and left. Inside the envelope was a napkin. Unfolded, it read, You gave me food. I found my voice. Here's mine. And on the back, a poem. Simple, short, about hope. Ellie sat down and cried, the kind of cry that cleans more than it breaks. That night she filmed one last video. No lights, no microphone. Just her phone propped on a stack of donated books. She spoke directly, softly. A year ago, I thought I was giving something small. A sandwich. A warm word. But the truth is that moment gave something to me. It taught me what community means, what kindness looks like, and what happens when you stop walking past people and start walking with them. She paused, then smiled. Turner House isn't a place. It's a choice, and you can make that choice too. The next morning, the video had over 10,000 views. In June, they received a letter from a community center, 3 states away. They'd watched every Turner Speaks video. They'd painted a tree on their hallway wall. They'd started their own wall of thanks. And they asked for permission to call it Turner House. East Ellie cried again. And then she got to work helping them start. Theo left for summer art camp in July. He hugged everyone twice. Marlene returned to Oregon for good, leaving behind a hand-painted sign that read, "You are never too far gone." Jonty started his own food truck. James began mentoring teens on the weekends. Ava got married. Carla was accepted into a nurse leadership program. And Ellie, she remained at Turner House. Not because she had to, but because she still loved the sound of chairs moving before breakfast, because she still read every napkin left on the wall, because she still saw herself in every arrival, and glimpsed redemption in every goodbye. One late summer night, she walked out to the sidewalk alone. The mural glowed faintly in the moonlight. The names were there, the colors bold, the tree's roots deep. She placed a hand on the wall and whispered, "Thank you," not to herself, not to the building, but to every story that passed through, to every life that made Turner House what it was, to the sacred ordinary, the grace in a second chance, the power of being seen. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't. Leave without making a difference. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter in someone's unexpected journey. Hit the like button to help us share more stories like this one, and tell us in the comments, have you ever helped someone without expecting anything back, or been helped when you least expected it? Your words might inspire someone else to do the same.